evening. It's after 7 o'clock, so we are ready to get started with our forum. I think everyone, our candidates are here, so if everyone would please take a seat, we'll go ahead and get things moving. Well, you know what? I didn't print out something. Okay, I guess I didn't print something I should have, so we're going to have to do this a little bit differently. So, good evening and welcome to the Candidates Forum, featuring the candidates for the City Commission. We have 5 candidates with us tonight. There are 5 candidates for 2 open seats. The League of Women Voters is a national nonpartisan organization whose purpose is to promote informed and active participation in government. The League never supports nor opposes candidates or political parties. Our goal this evening is to acquaint you with the candidates for the City Commission. We'll have 3x5 cards available that you can write your questions. Questions should be brief and to the point and will be screened by League members to avoid duplication and to assure relevance. The candidates will have 2-minute opening, followed by 90 seconds to respond to each question, and conclude with a 1-minute summary at the end. We will start in alphabetical order. So, Mrs. Alsager.
Good evening. My name is Mary Alsager, and I'm pleased to be one of your candidates and pleased to be here this evening. To tell you a little bit about myself, I've been a Michigan resident for 42 years, and it was in and around Mount Pleasant, and the last 32 years have been in Mount Pleasant. I have a family that includes a spouse. We were married 42 years in August, and we have 2 daughters who went through the Mount Pleasant public school system, and now one lives in Michigan and one lives in the great state of Arkansas. Most of my work was in the Mount Pleasant Public School District. I have had some other jobs, but that was the majority of my work. For 10 years, I was also a small business owner. Some of you might know me if you had a mostly young daughter, but a few boys too, because I had a business called Gymnastics with Mary. I've been a volunteer for Michigan Special Olympics for 40 years, and I've been retired for 3 years now. And in those 3 years, I've gotten to start some other interesting and fun things. From the Commission on Aging, I'm a water aerobics teacher, and I volunteer out there with the ARP Tax program. In 2018, I attended the Citizens Academy that's put on by the City of Mount Pleasant, and I've been involved in a group called Swim Friends of Mid-Michigan. And one thing that I always forget to mention, so I made a special note to mention it, is I've been coaching divers for the Mount Pleasant High School swim and dive team for over 20 years, and that continues today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeLue?
Good evening. My name is Barry DeLue, II. Some of you might know my dad, and that's the first question I always get. So if I don't make that statement, they all look at me a little funny, like I thought he was a little older. You're looking pretty good for 77. So I grew up in town, 49 years young today, and I've been here for 48 of those 49 years. So I have a degree from Central, an undergrad in 94, and I finished my master's work in 96, took a full-time job, and didn't finish my paper until 2002. So I do have a master's degree from 2002 from Central as well. For 23 years, I worked for local manufacturers. Worked traveling around the world for one. Been some places that I didn't know had trees, but I worked for a chipping manufacturer. So, and then I worked for another company, traveled around the world, and to acquire companies for expansion. So since then, I am now self-employed, and I have a real estate business, and I have an equipment business. So I'm still local, and I have a wife and 2 kids. Both my kids, well, one of my kids just graduated locally and is at Northwood playing baseball, and I have a daughter that's at Mount Pleasant High School. And my wife is also a lifelong resident of Mount Pleasant, so that's it.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
My name is Brandon McQueen. I'm born and raised here in Mount Pleasant, lived here my whole life. I was born into poverty to a single mother. I'm the oldest of 7 siblings, 3 different dads. I think that brings a unique perspective that you won't see coming from a lot of commission candidates, whether it's here or anywhere. I went through Mount Pleasant Public Schools. I actually graduated from Oasis Alternative School. Actually, it was a year early, a salutatorian. After that, I went to Mid. I got a Associates in General Studies and Associates in Sociology at Mid. Then I transferred to CMU. That's when the opportunity came to open up a dispensary a decade ago. Some of you might remember that. So I ran the dispensary downtown for 10 years. After we went to the Supreme Court, we shut that down. And then I focused on the caregiver side of things for a while. I could see that the whole industry was changing, so I moved on to teaching martial arts. And so that's where I'm at now. I run a martial arts school. As a matter of fact, my last class just finished at 6:45, so that's why I'm in my work uniform. Since then, I'm back at CMU finishing up my bachelor's. It's important for me to get it, even if it's not how I'm going to make money. My first child was just born, so my daughter was born on August 25th, so that's probably the most exciting thing in my life right now. I've been on the school board for 10 years, so I have a significant amount of experience with these types of boards and these types of governments and how they work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Rise?
Thank you. Like many of you, Mount Pleasant is my home. I've lived here for several decades. I won't tell you exactly how many, but so I went to school here, graduated from Mount Pleasant High School. I've raised a family here. We have a family business here. I work at CMU. I'm alumni of CMU, have a master's degree in higher ed administration. And so I really understand the student side of things. I understand the business side of things. I also understand what it's like to be a resident and to live here and to have needs from the city and want a community that's safe and workable and pleasant. I think Mount Pleasant, that word is really critical to me. So I also, in running for commission, I feel like the voice of the people is really important, and I want to give citizens that opportunity, and I feel like we can do more to bring people into the process of city government. And we have wonderful staff, we have wonderful people here, and I really think that finding some of the solutions here in Mount Pleasant, that we need to be more creative as a city, and this commission is one of the places that we can do that, to find solutions, to bring jobs that pay enough to live on, to bring housing that's affordable to the community. And so that was my, what I'd like to see.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ronan?
My name's George Ronan. Before I get going, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this. I mean, it's a great way to bring the community together. And they probably deserve a round of applause for the 50th anniversary, but whatever. I mean, I think that's pretty cool, right? Look, as I said, my name's George Ronan. I'm invested in Mount Pleasant as a homeowner, a local business owner. I own a commercial property in the downtown historic district. I'm pretty intimately aware of the joys and challenges of residents, homeowners, property developers, and small business owners in Mount Pleasant. I believe Mount Pleasant works best when students, residents, business leaders, and the various academic entities work collaboratively to resolve our ongoing and emergent challenges. I've been a professor at CMU for 30 years. I've held a variety of leadership positions at the university that require uniting people with different interests to reach common goals, to achieve common action plans. Earlier this year, I completed the Mount Pleasant Citizens Academy because I was more interested in learning how this city operates and what the relevant variables are, as well as the relevant components are. I think I can draw upon these experiences to help bring people together and to prepare the city to take advantage of emerging opportunities. I'm running for the commission to give back to the community that means so much to my family. My wife and I, Donna, raised our kids here. They're both at university. I won't bore you with them until after this is over. I think the variety of experiences I've had will help me to sort of work on behalf of the residents and come up with reasonable solutions to the problems that are facing our city for the next decade and beyond. Hey, you know, I've done some canvassing, so this is the thing, right? So you go out and you knock on doors, and I've been doing that over the past month or so, just trying to meet some residents, and I'm convinced that Mount Pleasant is just a very nice community. I think there's lots of residents who want to get their desires met, right? They want to meet their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now begin the question and answer period, and we'll begin the first question with Mr. DeLue. What 3 goals should the commission focus on in 2020?
First, I think parcel B would be one of those, getting that locked into place and either moving forward or finding someone else to get the property. I think they've been struggling with this parcel for years. It's been an anchor, I guess you can say, and they have someone on the line right now, but I think some of the things are changing, and they should probably take a second look at it and go from there. I think the city also needs to focus, the commission needs to focus on assisting Central and obviously Mount Pleasant, bringing more businesses in to the community, increasing tax rolls instead of decreasing them. We seem to be losing more businesses than we're bringing in. And there's, you know, we need to get to the root problem of that and turn that around. I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing for the city is the growth, the increasing tax rolls. And last but not least, I would probably focus on balancing a budget. I know they have a balanced budget. You're borrowing money from a reserve fund to balance it, but I like treating money like it's my own, and if you ask my wife, I probably have my first communion money still in my wallet. So I only spend it when you have to, and only when it's going to benefit the majority of the people. So those would be some of my goals.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Yeah, I would say for one thing we need to focus on is the empty commercial units. I think we've talked about that quite a lot, not just us up here, but the community as well. That needs to be a focus. I'm interested in seeing where things are headed with the community swimming pool. They just came to the school board meeting on Monday and kind of pitched what they got going on to us. I'm interested to see where that's going. At the same time, I'm also interested to hear conversation about the shoveling the sidewalks. That was pretty contentious last year, and I think some people aren't satisfied, and we need to figure out exactly what we're going to do there. One thing I would do is I would suggest to people that they use the ballot initiative process more. I think it's a strong process, and we need to get back to direct democracy as much as possible in small communities like Mount Pleasant. And then lastly, it's not going to be an important issue forever, but right now there's no denying that with all the changes and everything going on in the marijuana industry, that we need to make sure we get that issue right and get it settled.
Thank you. Ms. Rice?
Thank you. Well, I think the biggest thing that has concerned me over the past little while is the voice of the citizens is not always being represented. And I understand that there's a lot of issues that are brought forward and a lot of different sides of it, but I think we need to do a better job of getting down into hearing all the issues and finding ways, like with the charrette and some of the town hall meetings and other processes that actually get citizens a chance to have their voice heard. Another issue that I think is critical to me is quality of the water. We have the Chippewa River has been contaminated, and the drinking water, we're changing how we're doing that. That's in the capital improvement plan, and I definitely think that that should be an utmost important issue. And finally, I think the glut of vacant apartments is probably one of the things that really is concerning, because as those apartments are empty, they're not being maintained, and that turns into disinvestiture in the community. So those are some of the issues. There are there's a lot of issues, so it's hard to narrow down just 3. Thank you.
Mr. Ronan?
Yeah, no surprise, I'm in agreement with, I think economic development's a big issue. I think housing issues is something we're gonna have to deal with. The new zoning ordinance as it comes out, I think will be something that'll come up. I think the new master plan, excuse me. I think review and evaluation of the marijuana ordinance. I think when we talk about economic development, I think, it's a complicated subject, and I think we could spend all evening talking about that. We have students graduating from CMU. If we could change things around a little bit, and if you look at Vote 411, I've identified some things there. If we could change things around a little bit and maybe get, I don't know, 0.25% of those students to stay in the community and start small businesses, it'd be good. I think if we could look at the downtown area and think of some novel ways in which we could develop that, I think that'd be good, and I've put some ideas in that 411 thing. I think in terms of housing issues, I think that's important. And we could talk about some unique opportunities. I mean, the student population is decreasing. There's increased real estate. What opportunity? I don't see it as a problem. I see it as a challenge and potentially a good thing. What opportunity? How can we use that to our advantage at this point? And I think I'm going to get him a done thing, but I also think we need to evaluate the marijuana ordinance that the city recently passed. I think we need to take a look at that after a year and see if we need to expand it or what we need to. Time's up.
Thank you. Ms. Alsager?
Thank you. In my written responses to these questions that are going to be on the website or the Vote 411, I mentioned just one of these 3, but I do have 3 that I think are really important. One, I agree with some of the other candidates that we really need to hear the voice of the citizens. As I've done some door knocking, part of it with George, we heard from some citizens about simple issues, but they're important to them. One citizen was saying, it doesn't really bother me, but why was this street paved when it wasn't in real bad shape compared to others that seem to be more in need of being paving? And there's probably a simple reason, but she wasn't told that reason for why that street was paved. And many of you won't be surprised about this one, but I think we need to work to build more recreational opportunities here in Mount Pleasant. I've been involved, of course, in the swimming world for years, but also, we have a great winter season here. Maybe we could get some snowshoe trails or something like that. So just to increase recreational opportunities. And then my third one is the cooperation that's needed with the other governmental entities, partly for business, but just partly so that we work together. We not have more than just CMU we need to cooperate with, but the local townships, et cetera.
Thank you. For the next question, we will start with Mr. McQueen, and I neglected to mention, if at any time you want me to repeat a question, feel free to ask that I repeat it. Our next question is, how would you protect residential neighborhoods from commercial encroachment?
Well, personally, I feel like where we're headed right now, where we're at, we're doing a good job of that already. Our zoning laws are pretty strict. They do a good job at not only keeping commercial out of residential zones, they might also do a good job of keeping commercial businesses out of Mount Pleasant. So that's what I got to say.
Thank you. Ms. Rice?
Wow, hard to follow that one. So I definitely think it's within our zoning ordinances. We have a number of options with zoning where we could allow, where we could protect neighborhoods and do a better job of that. Specifically, well, I think being on the west side, in that neighborhood, we definitely appreciate having our commercial corridor down Broadway, and then all of the residential neighborhoods are protected. I think that the new zoning ordinance has some issues with it in the fact that it's more encouraging of mixed-use developments. I think those are appropriate in some neighborhoods, but we do really, when we're looking at the new master plan, we definitely want neighborhood input on each one of those neighborhoods. We want the communities to come out and get involved and to really dig down deep on each and every lot on that and figure out what would be where we want to protect neighborhoods, where we want commercial growth to develop. That's really important, so that we have passable roads, so that it really only takes 10 minutes to get across town. We don't want to be in a situation where it's too crowded. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ronan?
Yeah, it's a complicated issue. And I've talked to some people about this. It's easy to think of Mount Pleasant as a single entity, but the truth is we have 7 precincts in Mount Pleasant, and each of those precincts are somewhat different. And I think if we try to treat them all the same, it results in these people being unhappy or these people being unhappy. So what I've argued for in that Vote 411 thing is that maybe we have a bit of a collaborative council where we take a look at the Chamber of Commerce, representatives from each of the precincts, maybe the university, and maybe some other people in the community that represent different aspects of it, and think, well, geez, in this neighborhood, what should it look like, and what do the residents want, and how does that evolve? I'm not sure we're doing a bad job at this point, but I think thinking about it and being more sensitive to the people living in the neighborhoods and what they actually want, I think is probably not a bad idea.
Thank you. Ms. Allesiger?
Thank you. There are some strong neighborhood groups in town. There are some that maybe would like to get more organized, but as it is now, you hear from those neighborhoods that what they want is to be able to stay intact, and that includes a majority of single-family homes. They have some apartments maybe, or some duplexes or mixed-use housing, but the notion of a neighborhood, in my mind, is, for the most part, the single-family homeowners and then them working together with what else is around us and what else is needed. We know that there's a lower number of students at Central now, so there are some vacant apartments and duplexes, and so that's their issue to work with. But in the meantime, it is important that we follow our zoning and keep our neighborhoods safe the way they are.
Thank you. Mr. DeLue?
I think in the past, as you just mentioned, Central's enrollment's way down, but I think in the past, part of the issue is when we had a much higher student population, roughly over 6,000 more students some years ago, there was nowhere for them to go on campus, so they spread out. And they were moving residential families out of their houses because it's obviously more beneficial to rent them than it is to own them and have a residential house there. Now I think the flip side is happening. I think with the students being down, now you have an opportunity to maybe for lack of a better term, box in the campus and allow some development there, and then take the fringe neighborhoods and maybe spend a little bit more time and effort into turning them into residential if there's a demand there. But the problem is when you're commingling the residential and the student housing, then there's not a lot of people that want to live next door to a student house. So that's a very big issue in Mount Pleasant right now. And I think if you tweak the zoning ordinance a little bit, I think you could maybe help some of the residential houses and owners. And again, with the ordinance, we really have to look at it on the commercial side as well, because right now, there's some big businesses that won't come to Mount Pleasant just because of the new zoning ordinances and what's required to put up buildings and/or revamp a current building, which is what we would prefer because they're empty. So that's it.
Thank you. For our next question, we'll begin with Ms. Rise. Our current commission seems to have difficulty working together in a reasonable and respectful way. How would you work with the commission?
Well, I think having time to discuss issues, doing more public input at the beginning so that things aren't coming up to the commission without that input, so that the decisions are a little bit more clear coming to the commission is important. But always having that civility, that respect for one another, understanding both sides of the issue. I work at the college. I also have a family business at the north end of town. I work with students. I work with oil field people. I really do understand that it's really about just having a love for people and finding that common ground, because there always is most of the times there's a way to make something workable. It's just about getting to the core of the issue and getting all opinions, people to have a chance to communicate their voice, and then finding solutions that are creative that can at least accommodate the needs that are presented.
Thank you. Mr. Ronan?
I've only observed a couple of the commission meetings, and I've sat here and watched a couple of them, so I'm certainly not an expert in the current process that's taking place. I think having time before the meeting to discuss issues so that there's some agreement on what needs to be discussed. I think being clear about what's on the agenda, and when someone's discussing something that's not on the agenda, and not a resident, but someone on the dais, on the commission who's discussing something that's not on the agenda, I think you need to say, hey, look, nobody's prepared to discuss it. It's not on the agenda. We'd be happy to put it on next week or put it on another one. But it seemed to me what happens is people discuss things that aren't on the agenda, that aren't prepared to be discussed, and it just wastes a lot of time and creates a lot of confusion. But I apologize. I'm certainly not an expert in this, and I haven't. I've served on the Academic Senate for many years, and I tend to be someone who's well versed in Robert's rules. When you get I don't know how many people we have on the Academic Senate, but it's a couple hundred sitting there. I think. Don't quote me on that number. And you learn how to manage that, and I think it requires some leadership. And I'm enough. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Alsager?
Thank you. Part of being a good commissioner, I think, is to be prepared for the meeting. You get your packet a number of days ahead, and you have the opportunity to read through it. And at that time, if you have questions and concerns, that would be a good time to address them. After the commission meetings, they go to a work session. And during that work session, that's another opportunity to work through the issues and hear both sides, all sides of an issue, and see where you can come to consensus. Again, treating each other well, listening to each other, that's something that we can all do a better job of.
Thank you. Mr. DeLue?
Well, the city commission is obviously supposed to do what's best for the majority of the citizens in Mount Pleasant. And if you've been to some of the recent city commission meetings, I'm not 100% sure that that is being done for the majority of the citizens. There are some commission members that are very concerned, and they really do look out for the majority of the people. My approach would be, one, I would clarify very clearly that before the meetings, I'm going to go over all the proposals. I'm going to have all the information ready. Another issue that I've seen at the meetings is there seems to be some confusion after they bring something up in discussion. It's not clear. So I think, as you said, before the meeting, you really have to be clear. You have to be prepared. And obviously, you also have to be prepared to work with others on the commission. You can't just go in and, this is my way, this is how it's going to be. There's got to be some give and take. And to be quite honest, I don't see a lot of give and take amongst the whole commission as a whole. I see some give and take with a few members, and they're always looking out for the citizens. I don't see it from the whole commission, from the meetings that I've attended.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Well, as I mentioned, I've been on the school, I'm finishing up a decade on the Mount Pleasant Board of Education, and I got a handful of things that I'm extremely proud of why I've been on the board, but one of them is how well our board functions. So for 10 years now, at least 8 of the 10 years, I've gone to different statewide conventions for school board members, and we end up getting to sit at these big round tables with fancy 7-course dinners, and we get to talk to other school board members from around the state. And I honestly cannot think of a group that I talked to who didn't tell me that their school board was a mess. It was contentious, but we don't always agree on our school board just because we have a good relationship. Even though the MASAB says that we should always vote unanimously, which I totally disagree with. We have good faith conversations. We don't surprise each other with surprise votes. We don't, if we have an issue, we let them know, hey, I'm not going to be able to support this the way it is. Give a chance to amend it. Maybe they can support it. Maybe not, and that's fine, but it's a good faith conversation. As I collected over 350 signatures recently, and as I was collecting signatures, overwhelmingly what I heard is that they feel like the city does what it wants and doesn't listen to the people. And so that's one thing I would do, is encourage my fellow commissioners to focus on what the community at whole wants and not personal agendas or party agendas or anything like that.
Thank you. For our next question, we'll begin with Mr. Ronan. As the nation becomes more focused on the effects of climate change, do you think the city has a role to play in reducing our carbon footprint?
Yes. There's the Citizens Commission that I get emails from. I apologize. The clear, I can't even remember what the acronyms stand for right now. I think the university has done a great job at decreasing its carbon footprint. I think they've won awards for that. I think we could do some same things around the city. To be honest, I'd have to study. The answer is yes. The exact initiatives I'd think about or how I'd sort of develop it would require some study. We've got that new land that we're going to be talking about developing, the old developmental center. I've heard some people suggest that maybe we should keep a third of that the way it is. The middle third, that's sort of a wetland. We should probably keep that as the way it is without development. Maybe the other 2/3 you develop. I think we should look at city resources and how, if we could do something to decrease the amount of electricity or the amount of fuel or other things the city's using. That's clearly within our control. But I'd have to be beyond that. I know there's a Citizens Commission, I can't remember their name right now, that's working on this. I'd support it. So today.
Thank you. Ms. Alsager?
Thank you. Well, some of you know I'm a proud Prius owner, and that's just one way that, I can counteract that my husband doesn't have one of those. We do need to do our part for just whatever Mount Pleasant can do, since we are part of this whole global problem that we have There are students that are going to be protesting in New York tomorrow about this issue, and it's all been initiated from a student from Sweden who's starting this. So we do need to do our part, and part of what George mentioned, maybe looking at city vehicles, city usage of the the things that we might have some control over to see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeLue?
Short answer, yes, there should be some concern, and the city should do whatever they can do. At this point, sitting up here right now about climate change and what the city does, I'm not in tune with everything that could go to benefit on that side of it. If elected to the city commission, obviously, that would be something that we would become more familiar with, and I mean, I would just, yes. Everyone has a responsibility to do what they can, including the city as a whole.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Yeah, I think I'm going to repeat some of those same sentiments. Absolutely, whenever we're looking at policy, infrastructure changes, I think it's important to have CO2 controls and just thinking about pollution and global warming in general as a top priority when looking at these policies. But as with some of the other candidates mentioned, it's going to take some time. I can tell you right now, when I got on the school board, I got on there and I'm like, we're going to do foreign languages in every class, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and you find out pretty quick that you're pretty limited on what you can do based on state regulations, first of all, and then second of all, it takes some time to get acquainted. I think it would be disingenuous to just come up here and say, oh, I'm going to get on the city commission and then we're going to do this, 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 and this. You got to have a majority, you got to have a consensus, and you got to get familiar with all the different ways that you can affect change on this commission.
Thank you. Ms. Rise?
Thank you. Well, there's tons of research out there and literature about what other communities have done to make a difference in climate. And for example, West Michigan Clean Air Action Council has clean air days where they have days where people can't mow their lawn. They can mow their lawn, but they're asked not to until after 6 p.m. when it gets dark, so that it doesn't create toxins. But there's all kinds of things that we can do, and I think what it has to come to is that the commission really has to put that out there, put that request for that information so that we can actually take a look at it, what would work in this community. Definitely, I think public transportation would be a good start in terms of helping to reduce some of the traffic that's going in the same place. For example, anyway, I think we can do a lot of things, helping to clean up the river. We do have curbside recycling, saving the trees, helping have our ordinances where we don't cut down trees without a reason. Those kinds of things really do help reduce our carbon footprint.
Thank you. For our next question, we'll begin with Ms. Alsager. And what is your opinion on the mayor of our city being elected by the people instead of the city commission?
I think that the current system of electing the mayor at the first meeting of the year leads to some contention. That if the voters would have the opportunity to elect the mayor, that could have the commission start off on a good step for the whole year, and it might be hard to do right now with the way the commission is elected, but I'm sure we could figure out a way to do it so that it is voted on by the city. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeLue?
Should be elected by the people. I think city commissioners are elected by the citizens, and I think if you're interested in being mayor and you want to put your name out there, you should be able to list your qualifications and let the people decide. That takes it away from a smaller group And in that smaller group, there's even smaller groups. And so a small group on a city commission can dictate who's going to be mayor. And to be quite honest with you, if you have more experience, or let's say you got more votes, or you've been on the board or the city commission for a longer amount of time, those are all qualifications that the people want to hear and see in their mayor. And I think they should be given the opportunity to vote for who's going to be the mayor.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Well, from my experience on the school board, we elect our president the same way the mayor is elected on this commission. And so it's kind of disheartening that it's gotten to this point, because like I said, we have a great functioning board at the school board. But I do think that if there was a vote of the people, that there'd probably be a different mayor right now. And I think a theme that I have been strongly supporting is that it's shown over and over again that around 30,000 people, a direct democracy works pretty well. And any steps we take to get back towards a direct democracy, I'm generally going to support. So yeah, let the people vote.
Thank you. Ms. Rise?
Hi there. Yeah, I definitely think that people should elect the mayor. I do think there should be qualifications, and probably one of them should be having served on the city commission at least once, because there is so much that you have to know in order to effectively run the meeting. But I think the way having it done within the commission can lead to more contention. It can lead to special interests. It can lead to situations where people, I just think it's better to be in the hands of the people.
Thank you. Mr. Ronan?
I apologize. The name of that group is the Mount Pleasant Citizens Climate Lobby. And you can go to Mount Pleasant citizensclimatelobby.org, and they've got a wonderful website where they talk about all sorts of things we could do to help the ecology and help deal with climate stuff. I'm on the other side of the issue regarding whether the city should elect a mayor. I think since 1921, we've had a city commission that's elected, that's composed of 7 commissioners. I think it's worked well in the city. If you look at cities our size, it's the standard form of government. If you look at the trends nationally, there's a decrease away from using a strong mayor model towards a commission like we do. I might be in favor of changing the name from mayor to chairperson. But I think having 7 people up here that have equal votes decreases bipartisan, sort of a bipartisan approach. It decreases the focus on nepotism. It gets away from one person having all the power and using that power in a way that's very self-serving in many communities. This is the modal way in which cities of our size are being used. And if you look nationally, there's a trend to go away from strong mayors towards city commissions like ours. I think it's much more representative. I would not be in favor of a strong mayor model, to be honest.
Thank you. For our next question, we'll begin with Mr. DeLune. And we are getting close to time, so I will say that we have a large number of wonderful questions, and we are not going to get through all of them, but we'll try to get through a couple more before our time ends. So for our next question, describe your position on where it should be appropriate to sell marijuana in the city and where it should be reasonable to grow marijuana in the city.
Can you repeat the first part of that again? I'm sorry.
Describe your position on where it should be appropriate to sell marijuana in the city and where it should be reasonable to grow marijuana in the city.
Well, my position is they've already have an ordinance set. State law has been set. There's an ordinance in place. There's an ordinance that's going to be on the ballot. And either the citizens are going to pass the ballot referendum or the city's ordinance is going to stand. So either way, it's already pretty much set up how it's going to be. The city has, there's some differences on the ballot and the city ordinance. However, again, the citizens are going to decide during the election on which way they want to go. And as a city commission, my position is going to be, I'm going to represent the citizens, and if whatever they vote for or whatever they want, that's what I'm going to represent.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
So both of the proposed ordinance, the one that was passed by the city commission and the one that's going to be on the ballot, put retail in commercially zoned. The one on the city ordinance is not, I don't think it's all of the commercially zoned areas, where the one on the ballot will be any zoned area that's not primarily residential. Now, when it comes to growing, I think you also need to consider, you need to keep in mind that that's not the only other aspect of this. There's growing, there's processing, there's testing facilities. When it comes to growing, there's a bunch of different size grows. There's thousands of plants or there's 100 plants. We have caregivers right now growing 72 plants in their basements in residential zones. So I don't think 100 plants in a commercial zone is going to be significantly worse than that. And what we found out the hard way when the ad hoc committee went through the process of zoning the medical marijuana opt-in to industrial, we found out that there is so few industrial buildings in this available that it essentially was a backhanded way to block them out. The industrial park south has like a neighborhood association type thing, and they did everything they could to stop it from being there. Buildings that were up for rent came off the market as soon as that ordinance was passed, and all of a sudden there's no industrial available. And so, yeah, it needs to be everywhere,
Thank you.
besides residents.
Ms. Rise?
Well, I think we've done a considerable amount of work on this issue. The commercial, obviously the retail best fits commercial. I believe that growing best fits industrial. Now where those zone, is there a middle, like with the micro businesses? I don't know. I definitely think that's something to be discussed and to look at all the options. I'm done.
I think the citizens will decide. I'm comfortable with the ordinance passed by the city commission. I think establishing minimal distances from schools, churches, things like that is okay with me. We do it for alcohol. I don't have any problem doing it for marijuana. I think the current plan to allow retail in different places than you allow grow facilities is okay with me. To be honest, I'm not an expert in growing marijuana, so I assume that they're zoned in the way they should be. If they're not, we should change it. I'll just babble, or when I read it, I'm comfortable with it. But I mean, if there's some way that someone has a negative impact from it, then we're going to evaluate it within a year. We should evaluate it within the year, identify the negative impact, meet with the citizens, the commission will adjust whatever it is.
Thank you. Ms. Alzeiger?
I was at the city commission meeting where this recreational ordinance was discussed and passed, and it was really debated for different aspects of it, and I think the commission did a good job. One thing I like about the fact that there is an ordinance in place is that after a year we can evaluate and see, is it sufficient? Do we have the right number of facilities for all the different aspects of the marijuana business? It could be a good new opportunity if we don't have the warehousing and big buildings that are needed, maybe for a whole new business venture.
Thank you. So for our final question, we'll start with Mr. McQueen. And again, I apologize, we don't have time to get to all of your wonderful questions, but our last question is, should Mount Pleasant have a blight ordinance? Why or why not?
Yes, I mean, blight eventually becomes a health hazard. For example, I had an experience earlier this year where there was a seemingly, It's not exactly blight, but I think it falls in the same category. There was a seemingly rabid raccoon around, and I didn't know who to call. We called Central Dispatch, and it wasn't their job to take care of it, but there's this raccoon in the middle of the day, in the middle of a residential neighborhood that likely is diseased, and blight attracts things like raccoons, and we need to make sure that we balance it with undue burden, especially on economically challenged people. So from my perspective, I would probably have the commission find a way that we can have proper control of the blight, but the people who might not have the resources to handle it as well as the city wants them to, that they can come to the city and ask for some help on handling their blight.
Thank you. Ms. Rise?
Yeah, and I think blight gets into a lot of underlying issues. If you have that much divestiture in your community, I believe that the commission first needs to focus on why we have blight. But a blight ordinance is definitely one way to control vacant, rundown buildings. It does need to take into account the reasons why the buildings are rundown and vacant, and so any ordinance would have to both address the reasons why and offer some type of remedy that doesn't, that's possible and feasible. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ronan?
Yes, we should have a blight ordinance. I agree with everybody. Blight's a significant issue. The building I rehabilitated downtown, the old post office, was declared obsolete and blighted. When I picked it up, I went to the city commission and Tifa and the Brownfield folks, the Brownfield Association. They provided some tax incentives to rehab the building because it was declared obsolete and blighted. I think if we have blight in the community, we need to figure out, I agree with figuring out why it's blighted and also providing resources available to people who can, so they can rehab the structures. When something's become blighted, it doesn't generate a lot of tax revenue, to be honest. Right? It doesn't generate, it's not rateable at a high rate, right? You fix it up, you devote some money to it, and people say, oh my God, it's terrible that we're doing that or something, but before you know it, the building's doing well, it's generating nice tax revenue, it supports the city, and everybody moves forward together. So I think a blight ordinance is important in any community. I think particularly in a college town like ours, we need to if something's blighted, it affects lots of industry, lots of businesses, as well as who's going to come to the university and other places. I think it's an important thing. And I think we should encourage a variety of people to work together to deal with blighted property. So.
Thank you. Ms. Alsager?
I agree with the other candidates that a blight ordinance is a real good idea. The citizens that I've talked to who have concerns about it are the ones I've talked to are concerned about neighbors that don't take care of their property concerning overgrowth and not so much garbage and vehicles, things like that. It's more just not taking care of their lawn and having it really overgrown. There are remedies, and I was able to help this citizen figure out what she needed to do. I think the one that probably strikes me the most is with the lessening of number of CMU students and possibly some empty rental buildings or those that are half empty. The building owners that I know do a good job, and they do work to keep their properties clean. That's something that an ordinance would help with them knowing exactly what they needed to do.
Thank you. Mr. DeLue?
Yes, I think there should be an ordinance. There basically is one already for rental owners and multifamily units in the city. There's very strict guidelines on what you can and can't do and how your properties have to look in general. So I think that should carry over into the residential side. I think the key point that you got to be really cautious with is is why is there a blight issue? If it's an age thing where they can't take care of it, or if it's an economic thing where they can't afford to take care of it, you're gonna have to work through those issues with them. But absolutely, I think there should be one.
Thank you. That now concludes the question portion of this evening. The candidates will each give a 1-minute closing statement. We're going to go in reverse alphabetical order, starting with Mr. Ronan.
I just want to, again, thank you for hosting this and actually allowing me to speak, which is like really cool for me. I appreciate it. I think a lot of us have a lot of ideas. I think I agree with a lot of them. By the way, happy birthday. You know? I agree with a lot of them. I think there's some places where we differ. And that's probably interesting, or it may not be. But I think what I'm hearing is everybody's sort of committed to working together to sort of make the city better. So I was really pleased to be able to sit up here and talk about some ideas. I really feel privileged to be with everybody up here. So I just want to say thank you. If elected, I'll do the best I can to, meet the needs of the city.
Thank you. Ms. Rise?
Yeah, I concur. I definitely think that when people come together, like such as this forum, ideas, free flow of ideas actually generates lots of conversations and discussions, and we build upon each other's answers, as you see. And so I think that that's a good thing. And so if I'm elected, I definitely plan to serve the citizens to my best ability, to work with the commissioners and keep Mount Pleasant as much as we can. I think we got a good town here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to get to share my love for Mount Pleasant with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Thank you. Well, like I've mentioned before, I have 10 years of experience on a board like this, a commission like this, with the school board. And I think if you ask around, that most people consider that we did a really good job over the last decade. And so I have some experience to bring to the table. Second to that, I have, I think, a very diverse perspective compared to most people, not just necessarily commissioners. Like I mentioned, I'm the oldest of 7 kids, 3 different dads, born in poverty. My 5 youngest siblings, they're half black. And so there's my dad's family, there's my mom's family, there's my stepdad's family, there's my stepmom's family, there's my black family. Like, I have this diverse experience of poverty, working class. As I got into the school board, I started stepping up into the middle class. I've become a business owner a couple times over. So I have perspectives from all of these different angles that I bring on top of the experience. And finally, I have a passion, a sense of duty to a civic life. And that means that sometimes there's sacrifices and consequences, because not everybody likes what you have to say or like what you do, even if it's right.
Thank you. Mr. DeLue?
Thank you. Again, I'm a lifelong resident. I was a student. I was employed here, and I'm a small business owner. So I've got a pretty unique take on every aspect of the city, and I've seen good and bad on all aspects of those. I managed some pretty big budgets when I was a regional sales manager. I had anywhere between 6 and 60 employees. My budget was anywhere between $1 million and $38 million that I managed. I had to set marketing, I had to set budgets. So I'm very familiar working with a team to do what's right and to get a plan in place and move forward.
Thank you. Ms. Alsager?
Thank you. I think I have a good background being an educator. When I was asked to run, I thought about it real carefully of, is this what I wanted to do in my retirement? And I really think it is something that I can do to give back to the city. Moving to Michigan 42 years ago, we didn't know that we would be here at this point in time. The state of Iowa sent us a letter, come back to Iowa. So Michigan is definitely in our hearts. I think I have the ability to listen to people and to study issues and to be a good representative and be a good voice for the people. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the candidates for sharing their views with us this evening. Thank you also to Teresa Turner in the back for arranging the forum, to our City Hall staff, also in the back, for all of your support in having us have this forum here this evening, to MAC3 TV for recording the forum, and for the members of the audience for all of the wonderful questions that you have provided. For further information on the candidates running for City Commission, you can go to vote411.org. And please remember to vote on Election Day. The polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. To help you be a more informed voter, the League of Women Voters often has educational programs. We are working on some for the fall, and you'll be hearing more about those over the next few weeks. And remember that democracy is not a spectator sport. And that concludes tonight's forum, and thank you for coming, and good night.
Good luck.